Thank you so much.
Okay, Jose, if you should wait there. And yes, we should be live now. Over to you.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's a privilege and an honor for me to represent the Department of Information and Communications Technology of the Republic of the Philippines in this uh, very significant event by Tower Exchange. And I'm privileged to render a uh, keynote speech on the the journey that the Philippines has had regarding a common tower regime. Well, start off, the Philippines continues to hold great potential as one of the rising markets for common towers in Asia, with its massive need for connectivity and coverage. Compared to its ASEAN neighbors, our country is aggressively working towards being, at least at par in terms of tower density, coverage, and overall quality of ICT services. As a country, we feel the need to deepen our wireless network capacity through such activities as increasing the number of cell sites and other ICT infrastructure in the different regions of the Philippines in view of the growing number of mobile internet users and mobile data traffic throughout the country. And the need has been rendered all the more acute because of the current COVID-19 pandemic. So, in order to deliver quality telecommunications and information services throughout the country over the next years, with the help of Tower Exchange and our friends in the common tower sector, it was determined that at least 50,000 additional telecommunications towers, specifically shared or common towers, must be built, especially in the unserved and underserved areas in as short a time as possible. So, in order to meet this and to fast track the rollout of passive telecommunications towers here in the Philippines, common towers, uh, we at the Department of Information and Communications Technology of the Philippines issued Department Circular number 8 in May of this year to establish the policy guidelines on the co-location and sharing of passive telecommunications tower infrastructure for macrocell sites. Well, we call this the policy on shared PTTIs. The policy on shared PTTIs is the fruit of the Common Tower Initiative, which started development in 2018. The initiative targets to widen the base of common towers and promote better quality and more extensive coverage of telecommunications and internet services in the country. So, aside from that, uh, several of our Philippine agencies got together and in support of the shared PTTI policy, we came up with a joint memorandum circular in order to address and streamline all the guidelines for the issuance of permits, licenses, and certificates for the construction of these common towers. So the objective of that Joint Memorandum Circular, or the JMC, is to streamline and reduce the process so that there will be no more delays in securing the necessary permits, licenses, clearance, certificates, and other such requirements for the construction of these common towers. So the processing time was reduced from 241 days down to 16 days. So for permits, 13 days to 8 days, documentary requirements from 86 days to 35 days. So the idea here is to drastically reduce the cost in terms of time as well as the cost of licensing the towers. So under the JMC, the national government agencies of the Philippines, as well as the local government units, are required to process, approve, and issue permits within specific timelines under our law on ease of doing business and efficient government service delivery act. Okay. So permits that are not approved within the prescribed periods The aggrieved applicants can go to our anti-red tape authority and ask that their applications be deemed approved. And the anti-red tape authority, headed by our able Director General Jeremiah Belhica, has been at the forefront of making sure that the timelines are properly complied with. Okay. So aside from that, we also in the DICT instituted our Common Tower portal. So as part of the streamlining efforts and also in response to digitalizing our application procedures for the registration of independent tower companies or ITCs, the Common Tower Registration Portal provides a list of complete documentary requirements and information on how to qualify and register as an ITC here in the Philippines. And of course, the the link for that is in our website, and all the information is there. So that system is in response to our efforts for digitalizing the application process. Okay. Okay. So everything you need to do is there. The application is online. You can just fill it out and then upload all the documentary requirements. And once complete, um, we in the DICT are making sure that the processing times are likewise complied with as far as our department is concerned. Okay, so we're looking at a robust independent tower company sector, and because it's a new industry, uh, efforts are now underway into providing for pioneering industry status with the Board of Investment of the Philippines. Okay, so DICT has recently issued 23 provisional ITC certificates of registration to tower companies with previous agreements with the department. So with that, they are now able to engage with our mobile network operators and proceed with their ownership, construction, management, operation of passive telecommunications tower infrastructure. Okay. So aside from that, a number of tower companies have also applied for registration through our Common Tower portal. So in addition to the 23 previous ITC registrants, the DICT has already approved an additional 5 independent tower companies. Okay. Uh, okay. So now going to the status of tower permitting across the country. Uh, so our 3 major telcos, Globe, Smart, and Dito, have recently given statistics on their tower rollout. Right. So as far as Globe is concerned, they have reported that they have been issued 1,857 tower permits. Smart with a little less than 500 permits, and Dito Telecommunity with about 2,300 permits. So the total across all three would be about 4,644 permits issued within the period from July to November of this year. So, so as far as that is concerned, Globe has recorded about a 590% increase in average monthly issuance in the building permits of their towers, with Smart recording a close to 200% increase. Our Department of Interior and Local Government has reported as of November 26 of this year that about 433 cities and municipalities have approved about 2,220 permits and clearances. Our own anti-red tape authority also reported as of end of November a total of 2,486 releases in terms of permits, and it also issued compliance orders to local government units, as well as compliance reports, summary hearings, and uh, successful proceedings in which they were able to have permits deemed approved. Okay, so in terms of the number of towers built since July 2020, a total of 2,510 additional towers, physical sites were reported to be built. So the average monthly build out was about 500 towers. Okay. So here, Globe has reported about 661 towers having been built at the time. Smart with 313, and with Dito building about 1,500 towers. So with these recent reports, so as of November 2020, the number of towers in the Philippines currently stands at about 22,405. Okay. And if you've been following Philippine news as of late, our President Rodrigo Roa Duterte also gave an express call for all the telecommunications companies to improve their telecommunications services by December. So, along with that, of course, adding to, of course, the release of the Common Tower Policy, the Joint Memorandum Circular on Common Tower Permitting, the President likewise called for the local government units and the national government agencies to hasten the issuance of permits for telecommunications companies and to improve, for them to be able to improve their services. Okay. There's also this is coupled with a demand for an additional 50,000 towers across the various regions of the country. Okay. So the idea here is to invite investor interest from both local and foreign sources. You know, so the Philippine tower industry would remain bullish, and the idea is for that sector to steadily increase with more tower companies intending to participate in this pioneering Philippine common tower industry sector. So with the current 22,400 towers of these telcos and 4,644 construction permits issued to them from July to November, it is clear that the Philippines still requires, a lot of towers. That hardly made a dent on the needed 50,000 additional towers to adequately connect the entire country. Okay, part of the challenge there really is because of the COVID-19 pandemic, which also hampers the infrastructure deployment of the telcos and our tower and the independent tower company sector. Okay, so the idea here is we need independent tower companies as force multipliers to accelerate overall tower build in the different regions. Okay, so the idea here is helping out the telcos to heed the President's call to improve telecommunication service by year-end 2020. On the part of Congress, well, our Philippine Congress has also issued what we call Bayanihan to Recover as One Act, RA 11494. Bayanihan is essentially, it calls for a spirit of, helping out each other, the community helping out each other. Clearly, we have Section 4 here, where the President is authorized to exercise all powers as are necessary and proper to implement COVID-19 response and recovery interventions, including the undertaking of measures in partnership with ICT and telco service providers to accelerate the deployment of ICT infrastructure, particularly additional cell towers, equipment, software, and wireless technologies throughout the country to address the need for digital connectivity, internet speed and stability, and the overall quality of service when it comes to ICT. Okay, so that law, Bayanihan law, includes, such measures as temporarily suspending the requirements for permits and other clearances when it comes to the construction of telecommunications and internet or ICT infrastructure, streamlining other regulatory processes and procedures for the development and improvement of digital and internet and satellite technology infrastructure for ICT. And, with that very robust and supportive regulatory environment here in the Philippines, the telecommunications companies are already engaging independent tower companies for their tower rollouts. So according to recent reports, the Philippine telco giant PLDT and its wireless unit Smart Communications are now taking advantage of the Common Tower initiative, and they are set to initially deploy about 200 cell sites pursuant to its agreements with several ITCs. And these are just initial deployments. uh, PLDT has expressly stated that it was doing so in support of President Duterte's administration and the Common Tower Initiative and the overall goal of improving connectivity in the country. Okay. Globe, as well as Dito, have likewise reported that they have entered into a number of agreements with various independent tower companies, with Globe planning to build an additional 900 new cell sites pursuant to its agreements. Dito, on the other hand, has reported that it is on track when it comes to fulfilling its commitments towards the March of next year commercial rollout. And that includes the number of towers that they need to deploy in order to fulfill their initial coverage commitment. Okay. So just recently, the National Telecommunications Commission also reported that the services of the telecommunications companies have significantly improved. Looking at figures from July 2016, compared that to November 2020, the Philippines, in terms of fixed download speeds, has increased about 262.7%. Okay, so in July 16, it was about 7.91 Mbps. Right now, it sits at an average of 28.69 Mbps as of November. For mobile download speeds, uh, the increase is about 148% from 7.4 Mbps in July 2016 to about 18.4 Mbps in November 2020. Okay. Um, Recent reports of Globe they reported that they have exceeded their site rollout and upgrade targets. As for Smart, it has reported that its wireless population coverage in the Philippines is at 96%, with an average download speed of 23 Mbps and 32 Mbps in Metro Manila. Smart is reportedly present in 95% of the cities and municipalities in the country. So finally, when it came to the policy of on shared PTTIs, we at the Department of Information Communications Technology see it as a prime opportunity for implementing the government's Free Public Internet Access Program, or the Free Wi-Fi for All program, under the leadership of our own Secretary Gregorio Onasan II. Since DICT, the idea here is that the DICT would be able to utilize the common macro cell towers uh, in order to install microwave backhaul to further facilitate the rollout of internet connectivity in the unserved and underserved areas in the country. Okay, so well, that's a lot of information, and again, I would like to thank you for the opportunity to be here and to talk with you on our journey here in the Philippines towards the common tower infrastructure regime. So with this, of course, the Philippines welcomes your enthusiasm and participation in its common tower initiative And we are confident that with your continued support, the Philippines will realize its goal to substantially improve its telecommunications and internet services in the country. Now, in closing, I would like, of course, would like for you, all of you to know that as with any other government policy, the common tower policy of the Philippines is by no means a final and permanent endeavor, meaning it is subject to improvements, and part of those improvements really will come from the industry sectors themselves. The the main goal really of coming out with that policy is to provide a semblance of continuity, right, predictability for the industry, right, and for the, of course, for the country as a whole, right. So we have a lot of policies also in the pipeline going towards the this concept of shared passive ICT infrastructure, and we all know that the common towers is only one aspect of the entire plethora of PTTIs that could be deployed here in the Philippines. So with that, thank you so much, and thank you for the support, and yes, our heartfelt gratitude to you all.
Thank you so much, Mr. Castro, for the presentation. I think we haven't got really too many questions coming through. So what I might do is actually invite on our the other panelists that we have coming from the session, and whether they themselves might have some questions before we. I know we have to lose you shortly. So I'm just going to invite to join our panel in the Philippines. We've got Manish Kasawal from American Tower, Patrick Tangnay from Pinnacle Towers, David Gubiani from Full Tower, and William Walters from E.Co Towers. And we have Vinod Nair from Delta Partners, who's going to be moderating this session. If I can invite you all to turn on your cameras and your microphones. Just before we have to say goodbye to Mr. De Castro, are there any questions or anything that you would like to raise from your side as a panel whilst we still have him on the line with us?
I think, first of all, thanks to Undersecretary De Castro for a very, very positive keynote on Philippines and the developments that have taken place in the last 6 months. Very encouraging, and we definitely look forward to working with the department very closely going forward.
Thank you, Manish.
Thank you so much, Manish. Looking forward to you being here as well, Manish.
Sure, very soon.
Brilliant. So
thanks, Yusek De Castro. We speak pretty often, so I don't have any particular questions, but I'll be arriving there this coming weekend, so I'll look you up afterwards.
Okay. Well, looking forward to seeing you, Patrick, and have a safe flight here.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. So in which case, I'll say thank you very much, Undersecretary De Castro, for joining us today. And I'm going to hand over to Vinod Nair, who's going to be moderating this upcoming panel on the Philippines market.
Okay. Laura. So I'll be logging off shortly. And again, I'd like to thank everyone for giving me this opportunity to share the Philippine side of things. So thank you so much.
Cool. Thank you.
Thanks, Yusek De Castro.
Vinod, you're on mute, just so you know. There we go. Perfect.
Thank you so much. We'll move on to the panel discussions. First, warm welcome to all the 4 panelists. What we try and do, I think we've got about 30 minutes, 35 maybe, if I'm not mistaken, Laura. We'll try and run through a set of common questions, which I'll ask at least a couple of the panel members to respond to each of the questions. There may be some follow-up questions as well. I'll leave some time at the end in case either there are any questions from any of the attendees or anybody who's keen to answer some questions. Again, please treat this as interactive. Just as a brief introduction, I'm a senior partner at a consulting and investment banking firm, which works in the TMT space. And a lot of our work is around infrastructure, including towers. And we have experience with the Philippines market in particular as well. So just some house rules. If you are not answering, I'd like people to preferably stay on mute. And then if you can keep your answers relatively short so that we can work through as many questions as we can as we go along. So with that introduction, let me start with a first question, which is just following up from the previous session. And maybe Manish, I'll ask you first about this and maybe get David to respond on this particular question as well. The question I have is, how do you see the long-term opportunity for towers in the Philippines? And long-term could be not just the next few years, but beyond that. And has your view of that market changed over the last few years? Did you start with a different view? Has that changed as you've got more familiar with the specific opportunities and all the challenges in the market? So Manish, do you want to take that first?
Sure. Thanks, Vinod, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks to Tower Exchange for having me as a panelist for this session. Vinod, I would like to say that the journey has just begun, and we have a long way to go. I think Undersecretary De Castro just talked about what we have achieved in last few months, and there is still a lot to achieve. But at the same time, I think we at ATC, we believe in four key things, as a part of our mission statement. To lead wireless connectivity, to innovate, to drive efficiency, and to grow our capabilities. And all these things, take time to especially in a market like Philippines, where you are almost starting from scratch. There was very limited availability of very few towers, given the size of the country. So I believe the overall market potential for towercos in the Philippines is very high, and actually it has only gone up in the last year or so, and partly due to COVID as well. The government and the users both believe that a lot more needs to be done on the ground in order to have a world-class communication experience, telecom experience. Let's look at some numbers first, right, to set that context. From a statistics point of view, experience point of view, we know, and it's not hidden, that Philippines lags its regional peers, when it comes to experience, and it has one of the poorest 4G experience in Southeast Asia. Smartphone penetration, which is around 60%, or so. Internet penetration, which is less than 70%. Again, it is at par with regional average, but the internet speed, mobile internet speed, is, as Undersecretary just mentioned, around 18 Mbps or so, right? Subs per tower is again, close to 6,000, which is more than double of the regional average. And Philippines, as we all know, has a woefully low tower build out related to other countries. Network latency is almost double. 4G availability, network availability is also on the lower side. And then, when we see what COVID has done in the last 9 months, it has basically deteriorated the connectivity situation further in Philippines. Data usage has gone up by almost 30% on an average. More and more people are now relying on mobile for accessing internet and their day-to-day work activities. So as a result, network congestions are higher, and overall quality of service is bad. Now, and I don't expect that this situation is going to change very soon, because everyone is going to continue to work from home. As a matter of fact, one of the research reports, I think it was City Research report, which was saying that 25% of the workforce will continue to work from home in future. So there are challenges in the Philippines market, but again, there's an opportunity in this adversity also, right? And if I remember correctly, again, Globe in one of its report has said that from a revenue point of view, data now accounts for more than 65% of the total revenue, total service revenue. Similarly, smartphone penetration is forecasted to reach around 77% by 2025, as per GSMA. 5G buildouts are starting now. So the only way, my point here is the only way to address some of these issues and improve the end user experience is, build, which is declarative administration's one of the key economic drivers. And we know
So
Philippines needs.
So you're optimistic. You're saying the market just needs a lot more infrastructure from a TAS perspective for a bunch of reasons. David, let me come to you. Do you
just one? If I can, if I can just end with one important point here. The bottom line is that in this entire thing, increased network investment will be required to catch up, right? And I think all the operators, tower companies, investors, we all fully realize this. And I think that's the opportunity that lies ahead, and we are very excited to be a part of it.
Thank you, David. Do you share the same view? Do you have a different flavor or nuance on what Manish just said?
Now at the Tower Exchange.
Hi, David.
We were all sitting there, and the parting question was, what? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. And the parting question from Paul was, how do we see the market evolving? I think while at the beginning, when we started this initiative on Phil Tower side, we intended to start it in a bit of an unconventional manner. The bigger guys just right next to us were supposed to slug it out with the operators and try to find a common ground for operators that were not used to work with tower companies, and we were just focusing at a small cell in the IBS market. But that was obviously without counting on COVID and the amazing adaptation that has happened in the last 6 to 9 months. I think, as you said, De Castro was mentioning, huge progress has been made, I would say, beyond our expectation. I think beyond even the wildest expectation of anybody in this panel. I think around us, not only now there is a policy, there are licenses, but also around this table there may be more than 1,000 build-to-suit awards that have been made for by the mobile operators in the last 9 months. So it's definitely been a better year for Philippines than I see anywhere else in the region. And even though yesterday in a different panel people were saying how fantastic it has been in Indonesia, I think from the 0 to 1. I would say trophy goes to Philippines in this case by far. I think the operators got over the past 1 year the heck of it, and though they started the number of awards on the build-to-suit and on additional parts is just starting to kick in, and they got so much the heck of it that now power is requested, small cells is requested, IBS has even been considered there. So I think the question from last year, if we were to repeat it this year, I would say people would easily add a 0 to what they were expecting, and that has been an amazing, great start. As Manish also say, now we are in a second phase, in the rollout phase, in realizing all this pent up request and demand for towers and for connectivity in the Philippines. So that's a different animal altogether.
All right, David, thanks. So that leads me to a next question, and this is for maybe William first and then Patrick as well. There's always been this view that the Philippines needs a lot more tower infrastructure, that it's been different from some of the other markets just because some of the other markets have seen that growth happen earlier. So maybe William, for you, what are the similarities or the differences that you see when it comes to the Philippines compared to the other markets you operate in, particularly the other markets in this region itself or other emerging markets in general? So what are some similarities and what are some differences that you see today or you foresee going ahead in future?
Yeah, thanks, Vinod. So from a similarities perspective, one thing I think that probably stands out, despite Yusek De Castro's optimism is, I think like most of the places we operate in as E.co, certainly it's always challenging dealing with some of the local government units and this whole challenge of permitting. I think that's a sort of fairly familiar theme that we have to a greater or lesser extent in some of the countries in which we operate. Just to pick up on what Yusek de Castro was saying there, I think his view is, obviously as a government agency in charge of improving those things, he's painting quite a rosy picture. We haven't quite seen those things filter down, I think, certainly not quite as much as Smart or Globe are suggesting, and we're still struggling on some of those issues, particularly with getting government units on board. And also, this isn't really so much in the DICT sphere, but also with getting commercial power connected. So that's another similarity as well. Very long lead times to get commercial power in place, and obviously a lot of places where there is no commercial power. So those would be some key and pretty operational things, but I would say key similarities. Differences, I guess we've sort of touched on, right? The first point, which I would say is that, obviously Philippines is what you could call it, what do we call it? A brownfield market, certainly for towercos, right? There's been very little history of sharing between certainly the two incumbents. And I think that was something that, maybe we didn't see so much in other countries we operate. There was always some sharing, some kind of barter system between some of the operators there. So that's new, but just on that point, it's quite interesting, I guess, that to your point of what was the situation, a year and a half, 2 years ago, when I came into this about a year and a half ago, all the talk was how difficult it would be to get the two incumbents on board because they couldn't stand each other and wouldn't want to share infra and blah, 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 all the rest. It's been really interesting because they've actually been the two most enthusiastic adopters, I think, of the tower model. And we've actually made much more progress with them than the third operator, who potentially had more to gain, but seems rather more or less enthusiastic about engaging with the towercos to date. There has been some engagement. Maybe one more, again, very operational, and one other key difference that I think we've all experienced, because we've all been, grinding through our numbers to get a decent pricing out to customers, which is, the huge capex that's involved, primarily as a result of the high wind speed and engineering codes related to high wind speeds that we get in the Philippines, which can be as high as 340 kilometers an hour in terms of requirement. And also due to the, let's call it the radio planning strategies, certainly of the two incumbents, which basically involves putting huge amounts of equipment blasting at, all frequencies and all technologies at once. So the combination of the load on the tower, the high requirements, engineering requirements because of the wind speeds means, we see capex as being, certainly from a tower perspective, 3 to 4 times what it might be in some of the other markets we operate, which makes pricing a very challenging thing to do, to settle on a number that makes sense to us to recover our capex and opex over a period of time, but also a number that's sort of swallowable, if you like, by the operators. So those are some, those are some key sort of similarities and differences, I guess.
William, I have some follow-up questions, but let me first get Patrick's view as well. Patrick, do you want to add to that any similarities or differences, either because of the geography or the nature of the MNO market, or as William was alluding to, the specific network strategies being pursued by the MNOs?
I don't think this business is one that's necessarily very different in different countries. I can make up differences if I want, if you want to hear them, but in the end of the day, this is not that complicated a business. The first question is, do you get a contract with terms that make sense? That is more of a company level difference than a market level difference, but is pretty much the most important question for a tower company. I think when you look at actual operations, sure, there are some similarities and differences with other places. I think the two major axes here that would kind of, along which differences might delineate themselves, would be the nature of the market as being highly oriented to build to suit versus acquisitions. Obviously, there are different companies that come with different skill sets and experience in those two areas. Some people are very oriented towards acquisitions, some more towards build to suit. This is a market that has a lot of build to suit, so that's of course very relevant experience. I think the other axis is this question of power. So playing a little bit on William's point on the amount of equipment loading, which to some extent, I guess, is an artifact of not having had tower companies, not having had these discussions around where optimal utilization of power is and whether you really need to be broadcasting on all frequencies on every piece of equipment 24 hours a day. That has implications, of course, when it comes to power. So in the initial incarnation, it's a market that is restricted with regard to power. It's more of a site leasing oriented market, but it's very clear that the incumbent phone companies at least will want tower companies to look at providing power. And I think that's a context where a lot more dialogue needs to take place, because when you're speaking to a carrier about site leasing and you say, okay, you want me to build a tower in a 320 kilometer wind zone, that means there's a certain cost associated with do it, therefore I have to charge a certain amount. Once the finance people from the carrier are in that discussion, there's a very limited set of outcomes that are going to come out there. Everyone knows it costs a certain amount to build a tower. There's only so much you can go up or down depending on what that number is. But when you turn to power, there's a lot more nuance. It's effectively a totally different business in the end of the day. So if I compare it to Myanmar, which I would say was in a similar position to the Philippines for this industry in 2014, 2015, if you look now at the Myanmar market, really many towers were built, but the ultimate value of any particular company there is a function not only of the towers and the contractual terms they got, but how they manage power and the risk level associated with power as a kind of what is a daily operating business that has a lot of complexity to it, really will be a key driver if that becomes a big element of the business. So I think that's a big question mark for me in terms of what the business model ends up being. If it's more oriented towards site leasing, then I think there's a really predictable set of outcomes. I think once you move into power, you start to get into a lot more complexity, and that's reflected at every part of the value chain. So the negotiation of those contracts, people can get those right or wrong. On site leasing, they can get them very right or wrong on power as well. So that remains to be.
Before I get into some more operational detail, let me ask a follow-up question on this. Because it's a market that is opened up relatively later in the life cycle compared to some of the other markets. So are there differences just because the towercos themselves have learned from experience of what to do or what not to do? Is there a better understanding of what it takes to truly build a sustainable long-term market which generates sufficient returns for shareholders? You mentioned Myanmar, and that triggered the question. In the early days, there were 2 new telcos in town and probably about 7 or 8 towercos chasing the 2 new telcos in town. Are there differences today that you see just because the model is more mature, there are more learnings from other markets, the towercos themselves are taking a more rational view, the MNOs are taking a better view? Patrick, maybe first you.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to say there are a lot of learnings, but I think this actually is a bit of deja vu. Not as much learning as one might expect. So there is definitely learning on behalf of tower companies. We all kind of understand what we want to see the landscape look like, and I'm sure we'll end up with a situation similar to Myanmar, where you've got a number of leading companies who have a pretty developed understanding of kind of what makes sense from a market structure perspective, what makes sense from contractual commitment perspective, and you'll have certain other companies that kind of come in and will sign anything basically in order to get a contract. In Myanmar, that eventually evolved to the place where the people who sort of understood how the business worked, reflected both in the contracts and ultimately operations, ended up getting scale and becoming quite dominant in the market. The smaller ones tended not to be able to develop very successfully. I would not be surprised if something similar happened here in the Philippines. One area, though, that I do think there has not been as much learning, and I know that several of us on the call, Manish, certainly myself, David, I assume William as well, have spent quite a lot of time with the carriers talking about this question of power, because that's an area that I wouldn't say that it was gotten wrong in Myanmar. There was a variant of how one does power involving pass-through that's fairly workable, but it has some pros and some cons to it. But in the conversations with the carriers, I think there was a learning in the sense that they sort of learned towercos sometimes provide power, but the onion wasn't necessarily always peeled to understand how much power do they really need to consume on a site? Do you really need to be operating all this equipment on a site? Do you understand that if you're consuming 4 times as much power as the average carrier in other countries, it makes it very difficult to share that equipment? All of the question marks around service levels and how that translates into pricing. There's a huge amount of work that needs to be done to set up a power model. So the idea of kind of we want power is an idea that's out there, but that needs ultimately to translate into a fully fleshed out model, both in a contract and on an operational basis. And that work, I think, is still ongoing. Hopefully we will be able to share some of the learnings we've had from other countries, and that will be something that our customers can ultimately benefit from.
William, did you have anything more to add to that in terms of differences?
No, I think I would generally agree pretty much with what Patrick's saying there, right? So in terms of the learning we had before, I mean, you know, I'm always from a sales background, which is, you know, as Patrick rightly says, if you get the pricing slightly wrong on a tower, there's a chance that you'll suffer a bit, but not too bad. But if you do screw it up on the power side, you're going to be bleeding for years to come. So yeah, I concur.
All right, let me use the power discussion as a segue to the next question, which is, you know, so starting from a basic sort of tower build-to-suit or co-location business, if you were building your business plans out, what are some of these other revenue opportunities or the growth opportunities? Power is an obvious one, but clearly I'm also sort of understanding that it comes with some significant risks as well. So let me get all of your thoughts on this. So maybe going back, Manish, to you first. What's the 10-year, 15-year view? What are some of the additional growth opportunities? What makes that business case attractive for investors to invest in the Philippines? Sorry, that was Manish. If you can take that first, yeah.
Yeah, no, I was on mute. Sorry. No, I think the basics remain same. Right? I mean, we are starting with the macro business. A lot of build-to-suits to be done, and we as TowerCos, the first thing that we want to do is build a tower where we can also have tenants, right? We want to increase the tenancy level as much as we can. And as long as we are building towers which are profitable, the requirements of data and other things are growing in the market, will continue. We'll be providing both capacity sites and coverage sites both to the operators, all 3 operators in Philippines. But I think very important thing is, as Patrick very rightly pointed out, I think the way to be successful in this market, and whether you pick any form of business, whether it is macro towers or you move to rooftops or it's small cells, you take whatever, right? I mean, the point here is the MLA needs to be defined and agreed upon very clearly. There cannot be any ambiguity in that document. And I guess what is happening is, operators in Philippines have been working on their own in the past, right? So they have been building these towers on their own. So they try to add all the frills on the tower as much as they can on day one. In the TowerCo model, in the independent TowerCo model, where sharing is done, that doesn't make sense, right? I mean, we try to make the tower in such a way that whatever is the most optimal requirement is met. At the same time, it is also being shared by more than one tenant. So that I think that there's some unlearning that needs to take place on the customer side, and obviously we are working very closely with the customers to make it happen. So that's one challenge that I see, which needs to be addressed. And I think once that part is done appropriately and addressed properly, other opportunities which are there in the Philippines market are definitely going to be there. I mean, and I would not say we should worry about that on day one, but definitely as we move along, we need to look at some of those other opportunities, especially the small cell DAS type of requirements.
David, can I come to you? Do you see this as, yes, there are other opportunities, but they come a bit later in the life cycle? The core stuff is what matters in the initial years?
Well, I think the later may not be so right, but from a volume perspective, for sure, as you were mentioning, there is the need of a massive amount of macro towers just for increasing the coverage. But we've been lucky in this current awards that our microcell pole, something that we got really the heck an understanding of it in Indonesia, microcell pole and smart poles, are part of our current award. So we hope that as William was mentioning, we will get to a point in which there's no benefit that they see immediately at putting 5 bands on a 35-meter high tower, but they see building what's in the technology world called heterogeneous network, where you have high coverage with high band and high power and lower sites for capacity and providing that user experience that is currently very much missing in the Philippines. And so some of our, about 20% of our site award is on these MCPs and small cell that include a bit of fiber into this implementation. So we do hope that is going to help demonstrate to build necessarily all the towers in the same way, and that this heterogeneity on the network side can be found also in the type of towers. But I think beyond towers, there's an element that Philippines is quite advanced. The Philippine market is quite advanced compared to the other markets in the region. Is basically every band known in the 2G, 3G, 4G, and 5G world has been awarded to the mobile operator. So it goes up to 3.5 gigahertz. So in building and small cell in building are already a new avenue that the same mobile operators that had awarded the build to suit recently are now starting a new initiative. Okay, we managed to make a contract that works with an infrastructure provider. Let's push that also in the in building. And 2 of them are actually running IBS RFPs right now, and I think that's going to be a big area going forward. So hopefully, it's going to be a bit more of a mixed picture that goes on very high macro site as well as micro site and smart poles and in building to just make the picture a bit more round and give the chance to all the operators to have also their say. Actually, and one more point would be that they are now newer operators. I mean, now Telecom has just been announced a few months ago that are really relying on a very short range band, and that's going to have to change completely the way they talk to tower companies and use tower infrastructure assets because they don't need to use it the same way as those that have typical 2G, 3G frequencies. So I do is going to steal the limelight for a while, but we hope that this marginal trend right now is going to accentuate in 2021, and we hope to be part of that.
Thank you, David. Patrick, let me come to you. You mentioned power, and you spoke about power in detail. What about fiber? Or there was talk about in-building solutions. There's talk about small cells. How do you see other growth opportunities? Is fiber a potential opportunity? Do you think towercos will run onto the fiber play as well, or is that a separate play for fibercos?
Well, I think at the moment, given the amount of potential activity around build to suit and the high gross margin characteristics of that and the high EBITDA margin characteristics of that, once you achieve a certain amount of scale, for us, and I'm sure this may be the case for the others, it's a little bit like drinking from a fire hose at the moment. I think most of the water is getting past us, but we want to make sure that we get a healthy drink. So to some extent, from a bandwidth perspective, it can be difficult to be thinking about what you're going to do beyond what's a very clear immediate opportunity. That being said, we are all kind of a strategists and do like to be thinking about these other things. And I would certainly opine that fiber will be an element for some of the tower companies. Now, what that means remains to be determined. It could be something that's more oriented towards commercial partnerships. It could be something that includes a combination of owned fiber plus commercial partnerships. But within the owned fiber part, that's, I think, where the question mark will be. I mean, you can always expand the edge of these things quite a bit. Is it simply fiberizing towers? Is it doing some sort of broader wholesale fiber? The more of those steps you take, obviously, the further away you're getting from the pure tower model. But I would think that at least in the portions that are adjacent to the tower business, it would surprise me if you did not have tower companies that had internally owned fiber, at least for fiberizing their own towers within a several year period. Small cell DAS, IBS, I would defer to David on that. He's an expert. I would think, generally speaking, though, a proliferation of different types of structures that tower goes would work on would be something that I'd expect to see. Those are probably the most obvious ones. I mean, people certainly do talk about other things, edging into the data center universe even. But again, there's the Eisenhower principle here of how you prioritize your time. And when you've got a great big fire hose delivering a lot of potential in what's your core business, I would assume that ends up being where you spend most of your time, making sure you have enough buckets to capture some of that water.
Finally, William, any thoughts on growth beyond the obvious initial tower services? E.co has tried different things in different markets. Any learnings that you plan to bring to the Philippines?
Yeah, I think I tend to agree with Patrick's view on the world. I think if we spend 95% of our time, certainly over the next 4 or 5 years, focused on build-to-suit, co-location, and power, that's where more than 95% of our business is going to come from. So yes, I think there's other opportunities, though. I do agree with David. I think there's other opportunities. Certainly around in-building solutions. We've also had quite a lot of interest in what we can do there. And I think that in the Philippines, if you look at the number of particularly new buildings that are coming up, there's a lot of infrastructure development, particularly in Manila. I think the in-building solution market is another area that we will focus on. And potentially some small cell solutions with some of the high-end developers who we're working with, who are interested. I think they're sort of longer term. I totally agree, as I say, with Patrick. I would really rather focus on the very core business rather than spread ourselves too thinly across those. But we have to keep them in mind. And again, as David said, I think with Now Telecom, although they don't seem to really know what they're doing at the moment, but with Now Telecom coming in, I think then we've got a broader conversation, which all of us can probably start having with all the operators there, is how do they want to address their 5G needs? I think there's probably a conversation that could be had around, do you look at some kind of open RAN concept or shared RAN at least in the market? Because I think it will perhaps necessarily have to go that way due to the limitations of sites that can be deployed for 5G. So yeah, very much the same as the others are saying. I think it's just a question of how much you want to focus on one and the other.
Although you've neglected that one opportunity, which is, I know Manish and I have been speaking to you about buying some of those bamboo towers you guys have been developing. That could be a profit center for you.
I can let you have a few dozen off the back of a lorry. I hope Nalini's not listening to this.
That one is always going to come back to you,
Always willing to talk. Willing to talk.
All right, gentlemen.
There's as just one last point. I think as Amit, our EVP and President Asia, yesterday in his keynote, as he mentioned very rightly, that we all tower cos need to become digital infra cos at some point in time, right? And that's a decision that we have to take, whether we do it today or tomorrow or the day after, right? I think the answer to that is it varies from market to market. In case of Philippines, my personal view is, we still some distance away from it. In some other market, it can happen tomorrow. Yeah. So I think as a towerco, we have to take that call. But for Philippines, I think right now I'll bet my money on purely on the macros.
Yeah, no, and just to wrap up, so yes, agree. I think there is an immediate and a very large opportunity just in the core tower services, build-to-suit and co-location. So, with the capital and with the bandwidth constraints that all of you, I'm sure, face, why would you go running after other things when there's fantastic returns to be built there? So that I agree with that. I've been involved in many of these efforts. Manish, you were on the panel in Australia yesterday. I'm leading a lot of that work where the largest towerco is being carved out in Australia. I've had a chance to work with E.co during its expansion phase. And so familiar with some of the opportunities and the challenges. I was there in Myanmar in the early days when Myanmar opened up. And so quite familiar with, the rush of towercos that went into the market and the round of M&A and consolidation that happened subsequently before things became more stable. To me, it's a fascinating opportunity. One of the two big telcos you mentioned was a client of mine for 3 or 4 years. And we'd always advocated shared infrastructure as the only way to build the right telecom infrastructure in the Philippines. And I'm glad to see that shared infrastructure model is eventually rolling out in the Philippines. I'm conscious of time. I think we've actually exceeded our time. So maybe just use this opportunity to thank all of you. Thank you for the time. Clearly exciting opportunity. Would love to be, watching and helping if I can in any shape or form, but hope to see you individually, and good luck for all your efforts in the Philippines market. So thank you once again, and Laura, back.
Thanks, Vinod.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
And if anybody's got any follow-up questions for people, do feel free to reach out to our speakers via the networking app, and you can reach out to each of them individually. So thanks to everyone for joining and for Vinod for moderating, and we will close the session here.
Thank you.
Thank you.